Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you'd better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'. Come writers and critics who prophesize with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still to spin, and there's no telling who that it's naming, for the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are a-changin'. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall, for he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside and it's raging. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changin'. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand, for the times they are a-changin'. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast. The slow one now will be later fast, and the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changin'.
Welcome. Welcome to this online worship service by First Parish Church of Kingston, Massachusetts. If you're joining us for the first time today, welcome. If you are a member of this congregation, welcome. If you're a seeker looking for a connection to your heart, you are welcome. And please join me in welcoming our guest minister this morning, Reverend Dr. Michelle Walsh, a licensed social worker and Unitarian Universalist community minister who shares a private justice consulting and spiritual coaching practice with her husband, Reverend Dr. Clyde Grubbs, known as Tuckerman Creative Ministries for Justice and Healing. Her particular private practice is known as Sacred Play Explorations. She has also worked as a scholar activist for many years in urban contexts, teaches as a lecturer at Boston University, and is the author of Violent Trauma, Culture and Power, an interdisciplinary exploration of lived religions, as well as chapters in other volumes. So, for our call to worship, the Reverend Dr. Michelle Walsh.
Hello, it's lovely to be with you here in Kingston again today. I invite you from the comfort and quiet of your homes to join me in a mutual call to worship, for we are the prophethood and priesthood of all believers in our theology, and we mutually call each other to worship. So please say along with me from home these words from our hymnal that are Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. How shall I enter the Eternal's presence? Shall I come with sacrifices, with yearling calves to offer? With the eternal care for rams and thousands, or for oil flowing in myriad streams? What does the Eternal ask from you? But to be just and kind and live in quiet fellowship with your God. And again, let us join together in singing Bring Many Names by Brian Wren. You can find it in your gray hymnal if you have one at home, number 23, but the words will also appear on the screen here.
Please join in the chalice lighting words. You'll find on your screen, and then we light the flame together. Let the Chalice Connect Us by Catherine Callahan. As the chalice is lit, let us come together into the sacred space we have created. Let the cares of the day fall away and know that here is a place for quiet reflection, for a pause in our lives, for breathing into our true selves. Let what is said and felt here add richness to the dimensions of our lives and spiritual practices. We are strong together in community. We share the experience of being human. Let the warmth of the chalice, lit during our time together, connect us and carry us into the world. At this time in our service, we're going to briefly stop our recording.
And Joan will lead us in the offering now. And she might need to be spotlighted.
At this time in our service, we receive an offering to support the work of this congregation. We are part of a web of interdependence with each other and all that lives. One practice that affirms this truth is the sharing of our resources. When we give to the offering, we recognize that gifts have come to us, and we practice joining together to do more than any one of us could do separately. You may contribute to the offering using the online giving link, text to give, or by mailing a check to the church office. All the giving information can be found on your email order of service. Please know that what you give will be most gratefully received.
And we have some offering music today that you may know. There are some additional lyrics, so feel free to sing along at home if you like.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. You are like no other being. What you can give, no other can give. To the future of our precious children, to the future of the world where we live. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night. Hear the song spring's new beginning will lead to the harvest. Love will guide us on our way, on our way. Love will guide us. Peace has tried us. Hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night.
Our reading this morning, our opening words were from Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. And if you have your hymnal at home, you can take a look at it again, number 572. The reading that's in our hymnal is a vastly modified version of the original Hebrew, which I'm now going to read in English translation from the Tanakh. So this is the Hebrew version in English. With what shall I approach the Lord? Do homage to God on high. Shall I approach him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with myriads of streams of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my sins? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, and to love goodness, and to walk modestly with your God. Then will your name achieve wisdom. This is also different from the Christian traditions. What we have in our hymnal is different from the Christian Newly Revised Standard Version. And in the Jewish, in Hebrew, we don't want to call the Bible the Old Testament. It's the Jewish Bible, okay? So this is the version that's in our Christian Newly Revised Standard Version. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. So I want you to notice that there's differences between what we have in our hymnal and what are in the Jewish Bible and what are in the Christian Bible. In our hymnal, along with our chalice lighting, are among the very few shared practices that we have as Unitarian Universalist congregations. And as worship practices, they speak to our shared theology, both to our aspirations as well as to what we choose to exclude. And I draw your attention to the fact that we choose to use alternative language, the eternal's presence, and to focus on justice and kindness, as well as living in quiet fellowship with our God. What we choose to exclude in our hymnals version are mention of a God on high, transgressions or sins, as well as the language of walking modestly or humbly with our God. And most particularly in both our Unitarian Universalist hymnal tradition, as well as in the Christian Bible, we entirely drop the last line of the Hebrew scripture. Then will your name achieve wisdom. And I ask you to reflect on these differences as we continue to deepen and center into worship together this morning. And I'm going to invite you now into a quiet time of meditation and prayer. however you feel comfortable entering into this space. So first I'll lead a very quiet breathing meditation, and I'll invite the bell to sound, and then we'll sit silently for a minute or so, and then I'll invite the bell to sound, and then I'll open with some spontaneous prayer. So as you feel comfortable, you can let your eyes close or drop to a soft focus. And take a breath. Just notice the breath. Notice that you're being held or supported right now by where your body is touching a chair, a couch. Wherever you may be, you're being supported right now and held. And just notice the breath. It comes in cool and it's warmed by our bodies on exhale. Notice if there are any places in your body that are holding tension. And just invite those places to relax. Invite those parts to relax if they're willing. You may want to shrug your shoulders up, move your neck around. We carry a lot of tension in that area. Let the muscles of your face relax. And if you can, let a half smile come to your lips as I invite the bell to sound 3 times. And then we sit quietly together with our breath. And then I'll invite the bell to sound again. God of many names, many traditions, many genders and no genders, and whom we know most closely and intimately in our own Unitarian Universalist tradition as a precious and mysterious spirit of life and love, healing and wholeness that moves in us and among us and between us and out into our larger world, bringing our faith and values into the larger world. We are grateful this morning to be together, to have this way of staying in connection with each other, for all the work behind the scenes to make worship, Sunday morning worship happen, particularly Kathy and Joan this morning. We give thanks for this congregation and all the work that it does in the world, all the good deeds, the care for immigrant children and families, the care for families impacted by violence, and the support of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. So much to be grateful for, so much to be grateful for in vaccines coming and getting our second vaccines. We also hold care for the transition that Reverend Monica is making, as we have committed to her ministry here. We also commit to let her go with grace into a new ministry, into a new calling, knowing that as a congregation, you are made stronger by her ministry and will find your way to calling a new minister. We continue to hold in our hearts and prayers and with our actions in the world all who are suffering. And we hold in our thoughts and prayers those who cannot be with us this morning for whatever reason. And we commit again to each other and are made renewed in the ongoing commitment to each other and to this faith that is so much larger than any one of us. Blessed be. May it always be so. I invite us now to sing together on mute a responsive meditation song, Find a Stillness.
Find a stillness, hold a stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find the silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Seek the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true
Sorry, didn't realize I was on mute still. Let me start again. Pandemics, the climate crisis, racial justice uprisings. We live in challenging times. My sermon today actually is the middle of a trilogy of traveling sermons that began with one entitled "The Times They Are A-Changing," the prelude that Jordan sang this morning. And it's intended as a bit of a prophetic tribute to the wisdom and relevance of Bob Dylan's 1963 song "For Our Time." And that was a sermon that I preached for you here in Kingston back in 2019. So as you might remember in that sermon, I referenced the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s UUA General Assembly 1966 Ware lecture, in which he admonished us not to sleep through the revolution. I also drew attention to the various social justice movements of our era and to the fact that the leadership of our Unitarian Universalist Association is deeply immersed in preparing our Unitarian Universalist movement and congregations for our own role in these times, including regionally, nationally, and internationally. This morning, I offer a personal, prophetic, and pastoral reflection on being a decent human being during these times, which has its own origin story behind it back in 2008. So within our Unitarian Universalist tradition, I tend to describe myself as a humanist who practices Buddhism, as well as a mystic, or one who appreciates the larger mystery, including scientifically. I like the phrase coined by my colleague, the Reverend Tom Owen Towle, as the title of his book about the heart of our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, Free-Thinking Mystics with Hands. I do believe that the spirit of life and love moves in mysterious ways, and I've learned to notice and trust in the ways of that mystery a bit more often, usually, except when I get annoyed with the lesson of the way. However, one example of the positive learning from mystery is the origin of this sermon, as I said back in 2008. I had recently been ordained and was feeling a little dry for inspiration for a sermon topic that Sunday. At that time, I was working in a nursing home part-time as a pastoral psychotherapist. And just as an idle conversation point and with a fondly teasing tone, I asked one of the elderly residents I was seeing what she thought I should preach on for that coming Sunday. Now, for the sake of this sermon, I'll call her Ruby, though that's not her real name. So let me give you a feel for Ruby and her life in her nursing home. Ruby was 86 years old at the time, and like many of the residents in that particular nursing home, she had very few family members left to visit with her, and she suffered from moderate dementia. This nursing home was constructed as a home, but there really was only one private room. Most of the residents, including Ruby, shared a room with multiple beds and one single dresser for all of their personal belongings. Another colleague of mine, the Reverend Margie King Safier, once said to me that our lives are often work in reverse when we are approaching the end. While we begin life accumulating knowledge and things and relationships, we often end our lives by voluntarily or involuntarily reducing and constricting our life in many of those same areas. The Buddhist practice of recognizing impermanency and developing non-attachment comes to mind in facing these losses. And in fact, in many Eastern countries, they speak of Buddhism as being a popular practice for the end of life, whether they start as Hindus or Confucians or as something else. Now, Ruby was a rather feisty elderly woman, however, and she could be sharp-tongued and dismissive at points. I asked her my question because I knew that she very much loved the church she had grown up in Maine, and she could easily relate to a minister needing to come up with a sermon topic. But I didn't expect much more than a gruff waving of her hand, waving away from my question in response. But to my surprise, Ruby gave me a very serious and rather piercing look and said, "Preach on being a decent human being." Now, I don't remember if she actually wagged her finger at me, as I just did, but that was the intensity of the feeling in that moment. Preach on being a decent human being. So that says, "Thus saith my wise and feisty elder, 86 years old." So here we are with my sermon that's always dedicated to Ruby, with the question of what does it mean to be a decent human being? Do we as Unitarian Universalists hold this as a value and seek to be decent human beings, particularly in these challenging times as we face together enormous and global, national and global challenges, larger than we ever have, and particularly in light of the ever-increasing impact of the climate crisis and racial and economic and health inequities, and the need to reach across lines of difference for help and support. Now, I have a tendency to go to the dictionary and look up the root meaning for words. So I did that for the word decent, and here's what I found. Proper and fitting, not immodest, not obscene, chaste, conforming to approved social standards, respectable, satisfactory, fairly good, adequate, fair, kind, and generous. I thought, if I apply decent to being a human being, then some of this, not all, but some of this sounds like the Lord's requirements of Micah, particularly the focus on modesty, which also relates to the language of humbleness. So to address Ruby's demand of my sermon, I need to ask if to be a decent human being during these challenging times requires humility and modesty. And as Unitarian Universalists, how do we react when we hear those words as ethical requirements? As a theological practice, we have certainly dropped any reference to the language of humility or modesty from our version of Micah in the hymnal. And based on my observations and experiences over the years, I think that Unitarian Universalists do struggle a bit with the role of these particular virtues in our tradition. Attention exhibited in our historical practices, as well as throughout our social justice practices, such as, for example, when we compartmentalize them as the responsibility of particular leaders whom we regard then as the saints of our tradition. And you know, the folks, the ones we always do, who always do the social justice actions while the rest of us admire them from afar. Now, as a practical theologian, as well as a community minister, I do believe it is in our practices that our actual theology is reflected. So notice, for example, what happened when a Unitarian Universalist rewrote our final version of the final words of Micah for our hymnal. We're now required to live in quiet fellowship with your God. Now that suggests a bit more equality in the relationship than having something larger than oneself to which one is required to respond and be accountable. And somehow I imagine someone at rest and sitting comfortably in a rocking chair, reading and meditating with their God. The opening hymn we sang this morning by Brian Wren, Bring Many Names, creates images of a very approachable God in many human forms. Now, this hymn was viewed as rather controversial by the Methodists when Brian Wren originally wrote it for them, but we as Unitarian Universalists really embraced its inclusive language and brought it into our own hymnal. Now, on the other hand, we do have one hymn in our hymnal, number 26, Holy, 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 that I normally use with this sermon when we're in person with each other. But when I went looking, I couldn't find a single UU congregation that had chosen to commit this one to a virtual YouTube access, which I thought was kind of telling, because this hymn suggests a different conception of divinity as author of creation, mighty, hidden, and eternal. This conception of God in our hymnal is so transcendent and all-powerful, one wonders how there's even a relationship to begin with to dare to walk humbly or modestly with such a God. And this conception is certainly less personal and evokes more of a sense of awe and transcending mystery and wonder. From our personally living tradition source, you might recall those kinds of words. It's not an image of a human God, nor a call to rest comfortably or in quiet fellowship with this God. I went digging a bit further in our Unitarian Universalist histories and hymnal, and I couldn't find one single reference to or category for either humbleness or modesty anywhere, though there's plenty of references to love and compassion and to justice and integrity. So sometime when you have your hymnal in your hand, go ahead and look in the back of it, and you're not going to find a subject category for humility or modesty in any of the readings or hymns. None of these words that we do find, love, compassion, integrity, justice, metaphorically get to the same personal implications as humbleness or modesty. So I guess when the bulk of our heritage has been to stand up as heretics against the dominant tradition, including at the risk of death, there's not a lot of room for humility and modesty. Now, for those of you familiar with him, certainly one of our classic Unitarian heroes of the Protestant Reformation, Michael Servetus, was hardly an example of humility in action, given to defying and taunting the Inquisition, even to the point where he eventually was burned at the stake by fellow Protestant Calvin, and reportedly continued to hold fast to his beliefs as he burned at the stake, refusing to recant. It's a great and admirable story for our Unitarian heritage, right? But I ask you, however, is it true that being a heretic always requires arrogance? And is this historical cultural way of being really effective for us at times, and particularly in these times? Quakers somehow have managed to exude a certain humbleness in upholding their faith tradition and faith proclamations, even to the point of death and persecution in history as well. It would be a bit of a stretch, however, to think of Quakers as arrogant. There's a subtle difference between needing to challenge injustice and reveling in the painful struggle of that process. I find myself thinking about how often as Unitarian Universalists we take great pride in photo opportunities as we side with love or get arrested for the cause of justice, including myself. I have to ask, is there a double-edged sword in this that we need to attend to? What does this say about the vast majority of Unitarian Universalists who are not able-bodied or privileged to engage in such risks or opportunities, right? It's a privilege to be able to take these risks, particularly if you carry certain identities. For us, and possibly most strongly in our Unitarian heritage, our proclamations can take on a character of arrogance. So much so that we have a classic joke in our tradition about it. You may have heard this one. It's normally attributed to a famous Unitarian minister after whom one of our two UU seminaries is named, Thomas Starr King. It goes something like this. Universalists believe that God is too good to damn them, but Unitarians believe that they are too good to be damned by God. Got that? I'm going to repeat it one more time. Universalists believe that God is too good to damn them, but Unitarians believe that they are too good to be damned by God. Now, that's all the way back to the 19th century that the Unitarian tradition was seen to carry a certain arrogance and pride within it, so much so that this particular joke has been passed down successfully through time. And I don't have to reach far into our history to find a tendency towards judgment of others as less intelligent or less educated, less worthy in essence, as well as a specific discomfort with the word humility. Now, I've sat among seminarians as well as among lay people who have sometimes spoken quite arrogantly about the religious traditions of others, usually evangelical or more conservative Christian traditions, including the Amish, and who have characterized these traditions as universally inferior to Unitarian Universalism. And this even happened in my home congregation when my Catholic brother and sister-in-law came for a visit one Sunday, only to sit painfully through negative comments about Catholicism from the pulpit. It's sometimes said that we seek the wisdom in all world religions except the Christian tradition. My observation at times is that we UUs want to be more than just decent human beings, but in doing so, we often denigrate those we perceive as failing to meet our standards of being an excellent human being, or perhaps a better kind of human being, highly educated, socially conscious and active, rational, emotionally diplomatic, physically fit, slim, able-bodied, cisgender, and middle to upper class, and of course, culturally white. Do these cultural norms create dangerous implications when the climate crisis and justice uprisings bring our interdependent web into an even tighter relationship? when we need to become comfortable and curious about our discomforts with difference and or privilege. At a New England conference of Unitarian Universalists back in that same year of 2008, we were presented with some of the work that the board of the UUA was doing at that time, and our feedback was sought. We were broken up into small groups by table to consider our responses to the UUA's proposed statement of their core values and global end mission statement at that time. Now, through a facilitated process, the UUA board had decided that their core values were wonder, connections, and transformation. The global end mission statement was grounded in our covenantal tradition. The UUA will inspire people to lead lives of humility and purpose, connection and service, thereby transforming themselves and the world. Now, not surprisingly, the word that caused the most problems for several people at my table was the inclusion of the word humility. In general, it was the cisgender white women present who objected most to the term. And this reflects a real gender concern for women who are told that they need to reflect a humble and modest way of being in the world, creating internalized oppression that the Me Too movement resists. So, right, and if I was here with you in person, I'd say, my fellow women, when we do not appear humble and instead assert ourselves, there's a particular word that we're often called, right? And no, you don't need to say the word out loud, but you know what that word is, right? However, during a break, a white man that I knew from the Newton congregation, Bob Zeeb, came up to me very excited that at his table, they had really loved the inclusion of the word humility. Now, knowing Bob and his work to role model a different way of being, a different way of humble being prior to his death, I understood his excitement. Bob was a man who emphasized the need to do deep listening with those who were radically different from us. He gave an example once of the fact that he actually often invited visiting Jehovah's Witnesses into his home to listen and dialogue regarding their point of view. And how many of you would choose to engage a Jehovah's Witness as a Unitarian Universalist spiritual practice, an example of being a decent human being? And let's bring this a little more close to home. How many of us reach out here in our own congregations, in our communities, at work, at our UUA General Assembly coming up soon, or in any other location to people who are significantly different from ourselves according to our tight circles of identities by politics, religion, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ability, any of those? How many of us really take time to humbly and openly listen and learn each other's stories and build opportunities to work together? I would suggest that perhaps we should allow for a much more substantial place for the vulnerability of humility alongside our love for justice and kindness or compassion in our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition. With the addition of speaking to awe and humility alongside transcending mystery and wonder in our first living tradition source, help us to build accountability to this particular new way of being. It might be something for general reflection, for sure, since our principles, purposes, and living tradition sources are one of our very few shared practices of accountability. Now, through the congregation-wide adoption of the proposed AUU principle for study and the widening circle of concern Commission on Institutional Change report, we aim fully to embrace our goal of multiculturalism and anti-oppression and beloved community. The success of the recent UUA New Day Rising conference, bringing together over 1,000 Unitarian Universalists for this work, is an indication of how far we've come. But our success will also depend on grappling with our ability to be more modest in our claims that our particular cultural way of being in the world is the best in all circumstances. This means grappling with the broadest potential of our Universalist theology and heritage to embrace and be inclusive of Unitarianism, Trinitarianism, and all the metaphorical and cross-cultural ways of being that point to the something more of the diverse meaning making of mystery of creation and existence. And it means for those of us racialized as white, grappling with privilege, benefits, guilt, resentment, anger, anxieties, including what's labeled sometimes as defensiveness and white fragility, so that we can open ourselves with humility instead of shutting ourselves down, so that we can share our mutual vulnerabilities in the dream of creating a beloved, just, and equitable world community in this time of climate crisis and uprisings. I'm going to leave you today with these added words of charge from my colleague, the Reverend Teresa Inez Soto, someone whom I deeply respect and follow for their wisdom. And they write, "The strength we lack is the strength to take medicine that tastes bad, to tell the truth about the ways that Unitarian Universalism, both in history and its conflicted present, doesn't affirm the humanity of each person in the same way. For a while, Unitarian Universalism could both acknowledge the struggle and tell the truth about its hopes, fears, and dreams. Have we stopped? Are we back to worrying more about politeness than racism? Don't tell me it's not, show me. Don't tell me you mean well, do better. Don't tell me you are a good person, act measurably better. Don't complain about perfection, be decent all the time. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen." And we're going to join together now in singing "When Our Heart is in a Holy Place," and the words will be on the screen, and Jordan will do a lovely job of that.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our story from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Let's join together in a mutual benediction and read together from your home the words that are on your screen. Go in peace, Live simply, gently, at home in yourselves. Act justly, speak justly. Remember the depth of your compassion. Forget not your power in the days of your powerlessness. Do not desire to be wealthier than your peers, and stint not your hand of charity. Practice forbearance. Speak the truth or speak not. Take care of yourselves as bodies, for you are a good gift. Crave peace for all people in the world, beginning with yourselves. And go as you go with the dream of that peace alive in your heart. And let's join together in saying these words as we extinguish our chalices at home. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And Joan will introduce our sung benediction, and then we have a postlude with Jordan as well.
To close our time together, please join in singing our benediction. You can sing along while you're muted, hum, or simply listen. If you like, please join in sharing the hand motions that go with the words. They are the one way we can see each other sharing this moment.
With our minds and our hearts and our hands, may we choose to bless the world. With our